Imagine waking up one morning and feeling nothing but peace. No alarm screaming at you to perform, no notifications demanding your attention, no invisible checklist of obligations pressing against your chest. You brew coffee slowly. You watch sunlight move across the floor. You exist without apology, without explanation, without the frantic need to justify your presence on this earth. And in that moment of radical simplicity, you realize something unsettling: the people around you are angry. Not disappointed. Not confused. Angry. Your neighbor who works 60-hour weeks glares at you from across the fence when you're gardening at noon on a Tuesday. Your former colleague who posts constantly about hustle culture and grinding unfollows you after you share a photo of yourself reading by a lake. Your own family members, buried under debt and designer labels, ask you with barely concealed contempt, "Don't you want more?" As if wanting less were a moral failing. As if contentment were an act of betrayal. In this video, we will explore why genuine simplicity has become a threat to the generation of modern servants. Stay with me until the end, because the final insight we will uncover is the most transformative of all, a revelation that may completely reshape how you interpret human reactions, social pressure, and emotional independence. Think seriously about this. Why do people who claim to admire peace often sabotage it? Why does your contentment disturb individuals who never stop chasing something? Why does your quiet confidence irritate those who depend on external validation to feel alive? These are not random behaviors. They reflect deep psychological mechanisms studied by great thinkers such as Carl Jung, Erich Fromm, and Viktor Frankl. Their work helps us understand why people who are internally fragmented feel threatened by those who are internally grounded. And throughout this narrative, we will explore the forces that shape this dynamic and the profound effect your lifestyle can have on others. Before we continue, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, comment your thoughts, and share this message. Your engagement helps this type of content reach those who just like you are searching for wisdom, growth, and a deeper understanding of life. And I promise you, the insights that follow can shift the way you perceive society's hidden tensions and the subtle psychological conflicts that unfold beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Why does your stillness provoke such violence? Why does your refusal to participate in the great exhaustion feel like a personal attack to those who've surrendered everything to it? Why does the mere existence of your simple life, quiet, unadorned, deeply yours, trigger something primal and hostile in a generation that claims to value freedom yet lives in exquisite bondage? This is not about minimalism as aesthetic. This is not about tiny houses or digital detoxes or any commodified version of simplicity that can be purchased and displayed. This is about something far more dangerous: the choice to step outside the machinery of modern servitude entirely. To refuse the script. To decline the performance. To say, with your entire existence, "I will not measure my worth by your metrics." And that refusal, quiet as it is, becomes a kind of warfare. Consider the paradox: we live in a time of unprecedented freedom, at least on paper. No feudal lords. No legal slavery. No visible chains. Yet somehow, the average person is more psychologically enslaved than ever before. Enslaved to jobs they despise. Enslaved to possessions they don't need. Enslaved to identities they never consciously chose. They wake up tired, work to afford a lifestyle they barely enjoy, consume to fill voids they won't acknowledge, and collapse into bed only to repeat the cycle tomorrow. They call this success. They call this adulting. They call this life. But deep in the architecture of their exhaustion lives a terrible knowing: they had another choice. They could have chosen differently. They could have prioritized peace over prestige, presence over productivity, being over seeming. They could have lived simply. They could have been free. And then you appear. Living proof that the other path exists. Walking evidence that the system is optional. A breathing, laughing reminder that they built their own cage and locked themselves inside it. Your contentment becomes their indictment. Your peace becomes their prosecution. Your freedom becomes unbearable evidence of their cowardice. So they hate you for it. Not consciously, perhaps. They might not even recognize the hatred for what it is. It arrives disguised as concern, aren't you worried about your future? It masquerades as advice, you should really be more ambitious. It hides behind mockery, must be nice to have so much free time. But beneath every comment, every sideways glance, every dismissive laugh lives the same desperate question: if you can be happy with less, what does that say about me? This is the great unspoken terror of the modern age. Not poverty. Not failure. But the possibility that the entire game, the hustle, the grind, the endless accumulation, might be utterly meaningless. That the race everyone is running might lead nowhere worth going. That the price of admission to success might cost everything that makes life worth living. Your simple life whispers this truth. And truth, when it contradicts a carefully constructed illusion, does not arrive as liberation. It arrives as threat. It destabilizes. It wounds. It forces confrontation with the one question most people have spent their entire adult lives avoiding: am I living, or am I simply being lived? And so the hatred begins. Not because you've done anything to them, but because you've revealed something about them they cannot bear to see. The modern world has perfected a new form of servitude. It no longer needs chains or prisons. Instead, it trains people to enslave themselves, to routines they do not question, ambitions they did not choose, and standards they never paused to evaluate. Many live as if someone else were writing the script of their existence. They obey the invisible demands of social comparison, consumerism, and the need to be constantly performing. That is why your simple life, your refusal to play by these rules, feels like an act of defiance. You are a reminder of the choices they never made. You are the embodiment of the freedom they fear to pursue. Erich Fromm, in his analysis of modern society, explained that people often avoid freedom because it brings responsibility. It demands courage. It requires self-awareness. And so they choose conformity, even if it means surrendering their inner peace. When you choose simplicity, you expose this truth. You force them to confront their own abdication of freedom. And this confrontation creates discomfort, sometimes even hatred. Think about what this means at its core. The psychological architecture of modern life is built on a foundation of avoidance. People avoid silence because it forces them to hear their own thoughts. They avoid stillness because it reveals the emptiness they've been running from. They avoid simplicity because it strips away the elaborate costumes they use to hide from themselves. The entire machinery of contemporary existence, the endless scrolling, the compulsive shopping, the performative busyness, serves one primary function: to keep people distracted from the question of whether they are actually living the life they want. Carl Jung described this as the shadow effect, the emotions people project onto others when confronted with parts of themselves they have repressed. Your simple life activates their shadow. It makes them face the emptiness hidden beneath their busyness. It reveals that their lifestyle choices may not be truly theirs but imposed by the collective mindset. This realization is painful, and instead of exploring it, many choose to reject the mirror. Consider how this operates in everyday interactions. Have you ever noticed people becoming irritated when you slow down? When you choose silence instead of noise, or when you turn down opportunities that others would pursue out of insecurity? Why does your refusal to rush threaten those who worship speed? Why does your calmness bother those who live in emotional turbulence? These reactions are not about you. They are confessions of an internal crisis, the crisis of a person who built their identity on quicksand and now watches someone else standing on solid ground. Friedrich Nietzsche pointed out that resentment often arises when individuals lack the courage to confront their own limitations. Instead of examining their inner world, they project their frustration onto those who embody what they cannot achieve. In your case, the simplicity of your life becomes a symbol of what they secretly long for, yet fear they may never attain. Your refusal to engage in unnecessary conflict or competition can be perceived as arrogance. Your tranquility becomes misinterpreted as judgment. People begin to believe that your calm existence is somehow invalidating theirs. But there is something even more insidious at work here. The modern world does not merely encourage complexity, it weaponizes it. Complexity becomes a badge of importance. Busyness becomes proof of value. Exhaustion becomes a mark of dedication. Society has convinced people that suffering is the price of significance, that struggle is the currency of worth. When you reject this equation, when you demonstrate that peace and meaning can coexist, you are not just living differently. You are threatening an entire value system that has colonized millions of minds. Viktor Frankl affirmed that an individual who lacks purpose becomes increasingly vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Without inner direction, people cling to external symbols of value. When their sense of identity depends entirely on social approval, they become deeply disturbed by anyone who demonstrates independence. Your simple lifestyle reveals that it is possible to live without excessive validation. This revelation threatens the fragile structure that keeps them psychologically dependent. And so the hostility intensifies. Because you are not just choosing a different path, you are proving that their path was never necessary in the first place. Now we arrive at the territory most people never examine, the invisible ways this dynamic reshapes reality itself. The consequences of living simply in a world addicted to complexity are not always loud or obvious. They operate beneath the surface of social interactions, quietly poisoning relationships, distorting perceptions, and creating fractures that most people cannot name but everyone can feel. Think for a moment about the nature of resentment. It rarely emerges from genuine harm. It is far more often born from comparison, insecurity, and the uncomfortable realization that someone else is living with a freedom we denied ourselves. When you embrace a simple life, you are not just making personal choices. You are challenging an entire cultural narrative that teaches people to measure their worth through productivity, possessions, and public recognition. Your simplicity becomes a declaration that meaning can be found outside this relentless performance. And for those who built their identity upon these external structures, such a declaration is deeply unsettling. Imagine someone who has spent years chasing status, spending beyond their means, and tying their dignity to how others perceive them. Now imagine this person observing you, living quietly, intentionally, without the need to flaunt or compete. They may smile politely, but internally something stirs. Your presence acts as a silent reminder that they could have chosen differently. And this silent reminder is powerful. It awakens doubts they worked hard to suppress. It resurrects questions they buried. It reveals the uncomfortable truth that the race they are running may not lead anywhere meaningful. This is where the unseen consequences manifest most brutally. Your refusal to participate in the collective exhaustion does not simply inspire, it provokes a cognitive crisis in those around you. They begin to question everything. If you can be happy with less, what does that say about their mortgage? If you can find fulfillment without climbing the corporate ladder, what does that say about their 60-hour work weeks? If you can maintain dignity without designer labels, what does that say about their credit card debt? Your life becomes an accusation they never asked to hear. Modern life amplifies this dependency through constant exposure to curated versions of success, beauty, and happiness. The pressure to conform is suffocating. And yet here you are, rejecting the spectacle, choosing silence over noise, choosing presence over distraction, choosing authenticity over artificiality. In doing so, you disrupt the emotional comfort zones of those who remain trapped in the cycle. Your choices shine a light on a profound truth: freedom is not about having more, but needing less. And that single truth destabilizes the entire logic of modern servitude, a servitude designed to make people believe that fulfillment comes only through consumption and constant stimulation. But there is another layer, one that cuts even deeper into human psychology. When individuals suppress their true desires for too long, those desires do not disappear. They hide in the subconscious, waiting for any opportunity to rise to the surface. When these people encounter someone who lives in alignment with their inner values, these repressed desires awaken. And instead of rising with admiration, they rise with anger. Because when the soul has been ignored for too long, its voice returns not as inspiration but as pain. Your simple life, your grounded presence, becomes a mirror that reflects this inner conflict. And many people cannot bear to look at it. Without speaking a word, without imposing your lifestyle on anyone, you become a catalyst for emotional reaction. This is why you may sense hostility where none should exist. This is why your peace irritates those living in turmoil. This is why your authenticity feels threatening to those who sacrificed theirs. The unseen consequence is this: you force people to confront the cost of their choices. Not through judgment or preaching, but simply by existing as proof that another way is possible. And for many, that proof is unbearable. Now imagine an invisible tension that forms between two kinds of people, those who seek meaning and those who surrender to programming. This tension becomes especially visible when a person chooses a simple and intentional life. The modern world has conditioned many to believe that complexity equals importance, that busyness equals value, and that constant stimulation equals progress. When someone breaks away from this formula, the reaction is not neutral. It is often defensive, emotional, and sometimes outright hostile. But what if you understood that this hostility is not your burden to carry? What if you recognize that the rebellion required is not against them, but against the invisible structures that have colonized both their minds and, perhaps, parts of your own? To understand this rebellion, consider what Carl Jung called the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming one's true self. This journey requires introspection, courage, and a willingness to confront one's own contradictions. Most people never begin this process. Instead, they adopt the identities offered to them by society: the worker, the consumer, the competitor, the obedient follower of trends. When someone steps outside these identities and embraces simplicity, they are not merely choosing a different lifestyle. They are exposing the psychological dependence of those who have not yet awakened. This exposure leads to what Erich Fromm described as escape mechanisms. People who feel internally empty often use external structures, social norms, cultural demands, material success, to avoid confronting that emptiness. When you take those structures away or simply refuse to play by their rules, their emotional shelter collapses. And without realizing it, they direct their fear, frustration, and insecurity toward you. The rebellion, then, is this: you must become comfortable being uncomfortable in their eyes. You must develop what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a fortress of self-knowledge so strong that external reactions cannot penetrate it. This is not about arrogance or isolation. It is about understanding that when people project their shadow onto you, they are revealing their own internal conflict, not assessing your worth. Consider the concept of projection, a powerful force in human relationships. When people feel inadequate, they search for someone to blame. Instead of acknowledging their discomfort, they project it onto the nearest person who embodies what they are lacking. Your simplicity becomes mistaken for laziness. Your independence becomes labeled as arrogance. Your refusal to participate in endless consumption becomes seen as judgment. These accusations do not reflect who you are. They reflect the emotional conflict brewing inside them. So how do you break free? First, by recognizing that their interpretation of your life is not your reality. Second, by understanding that you cannot save people from themselves, you can only model another possibility. Third, by refusing to justify, explain, or defend your choices to those who are not genuinely curious but merely uncomfortable. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke about the herd mentality, the tendency of individuals to conform to the collective even when the collective is misguided. When someone steps out of the herd and finds peace in simplicity, the herd perceives it as an act of rebellion. And because the herd depends on shared norms for emotional stability, anything that challenges those norms must be rejected. Your task is not to convince the herd. Your task is to walk your path with such clarity that those ready to leave the herd recognize you as proof that departure is possible. This rebellion is quiet but radical. It requires you to stop seeking permission for your peace. It demands you stop apologizing for your contentment. It asks you to live so authentically that the discomfort of others becomes irrelevant to your internal state. This is not cruelty, it is liberation. Because the moment you stop carrying their projections, you become truly free. As we arrive at this final reflection, imagine standing on a quiet road where the world's noise finally begins to fade. In this silence, a profound truth emerges, one that reveals why a simple life triggers such strong reactions in the generation of modern servants. It is not merely envy, nor simple misunderstanding. It is something far deeper. Your life exposes a possibility they were taught to ignore. And that possibility dismantles the foundation of their psychological dependence. Think about what it means to live simply in a world built on overstimulation. Your choices directly contradict the narrative that society carefully crafted, the idea that happiness must be manufactured, purchased, or earned through endless sacrifice. When you find contentment in small things, you prove that the system is unnecessary for inner fulfillment. This realization threatens an entire structure of beliefs that many have built their identity upon. And when a belief system is threatened, people do not react logically. They react emotionally, sometimes violently, because you are touching the core of how they see themselves. Let us return to the teachings of Erich Fromm, who emphasized that modern individuals often fear freedom because freedom demands responsibility for one's own life. A simple life embodies that responsibility. It shows that one can choose peace over pressure, intention over impulse, clarity over chaos. And those who fear freedom may resent anyone who exemplifies it. Your life becomes a symbol of what they could be if they dared to step outside the psychological cages they inhabit. Carl Jung would say that you awaken their unfulfilled self. When someone sees you living with purpose and simplicity, the part of them that longs for the same awakens from its repression. But instead of embracing it, many become angry at the reminder of what they neglected. You are not judged for your choices. You are judged for the mirror you unintentionally hold up to them. Your very existence reveals the distance between who they are and who they wish they had the courage to become. Imagine someone who has spent years chasing possessions, status, and approval. Internally, they feel lost, exhausted, and disconnected. They have invested so much of themselves in this pursuit that questioning it feels impossible. When they encounter you, calm, grounded, unaffected by the race, they confront the uncomfortable truth that they may have chosen wrong. Instead of facing that truth, they project their frustration onto you. Your peace becomes an accusation. Your simplicity becomes a challenge. Your independence becomes an offense. And yet, none of these feelings truly belong to you. This is where Friedrich Nietzsche's insights illuminate the heart of the matter. He believed that people often resent not what others have, but what others reveal about their own limitations. Your simple life reveals their lack of courage, their lack of self-control, their inability to detach from a system they know is harming them. The hatred they direct toward you is, in reality, hatred for the parts of themselves they abandoned. Reflect on this deeply. Have you ever been criticized for choosing a quieter path? Have people accused you of lacking ambition simply because your ambitions do not mirror theirs? Have you been mocked for preferring peace over constant stimulation? These reactions are not reflections of your value. They are confessions of their internal conflict. And understanding this gives you immense emotional power. There is another dimension to this phenomenon, one that is often overlooked. Simplicity is not just a lifestyle. It is a form of emotional sovereignty. When you detach from trends, from societal pressures, from the demands of ego-driven comparison, you become psychologically independent. And independence is the greatest threat to any system built on conformity. Modern servants are not defined by visible chains. They are defined by invisible obligations, the obligation to impress, to compare, to consume, to compete. Your refusal to participate in these obligations symbolizes freedom in its purest form. And nothing terrifies the psychologically dependent more than the sight of freedom they have not yet claimed. This brings us to the most powerful insight of all, the truth you have been waiting for. The reason your simple life triggers hatred is because simplicity destroys illusion. It cuts through the lies people tell themselves to justify their exhaustion. It exposes the emptiness behind their compulsions. It reveals the fragility of their identity. And once simplicity reveals illusion, there is no return to unconsciousness. Some people fear this awakening so much that they would rather resent you than face themselves. But here is the revelation that transforms everything. The hostility you receive is proof that you are living in alignment with your authentic nature. If your life were insignificant, no one would react. The reactions you provoke are evidence of your clarity, your peace, your freedom. And freedom in a world built on invisible servitude will always be misunderstood. Viktor Frankl taught that when a person lacks meaning, they experience an existential vacuum, a void that manifests as anxiety, boredom, or a restless need to be constantly distracted. People trapped in this cycle are not truly living. They are simply avoiding themselves. When they encounter someone who has broken free, someone who has embraced meaningful simplicity, the contrast highlights their own disconnection. And instead of seeking change, many react with resentment. Not because they dislike your life, but because your life forces them to face truths they have avoided. Your presence alone can reveal what others are trying to hide from themselves. Your calm exposes their chaos. Your authenticity reveals their conformity. Your clarity uncovers their confusion. And the pain of this realization often becomes too heavy for them to bear. This leads to subtle acts of hostility, sudden distance, unexpected criticism, mockery disguised as humor, passive-aggressive comments, attempts to make you doubt your path. These behaviors are not about you. They are about the internal war they are fighting. So as this journey concludes, let this truth settle in your heart. Your simplicity is not a weakness. It is a form of rebellion. It is a declaration of independence. It is a reminder that life does not need to be complicated to be meaningful. And while others may resist the mirror you hold, your path remains yours, quiet, powerful, and profoundly free. To live simply in a complex world is to embody a form of quiet power. It is to walk a path that exposes the artificiality of the paths others follow blindly. The hostility is not punishment. It is confirmation. You have stepped outside the machinery. You have refused the script. You have chosen yourself. And that choice, more than anything else, is the ultimate act of courage in an age of beautiful, sophisticated slavery. This is where our reflection ends. And this is where your journey of awakening continues.